welcome to Lawwiser. Our focus for today's video is the recently launched book Emergence of Commercial Justice, Insolvency and Arbitration, authored by senior advocate Mr. Vivek Sood and published by Bloomsbury. As we all know, we have already covered the insolvency law aspect of this book. Today's focus is on the arbitration law. We all know over the years, through game-changing judgments and various amendments, there has been a major change in the arbitration law landscape in India, and not just that, it has also been brought on par with the global standards. So our focus today would be on the arbitration law and how it has bolstered the emergence of commercial justice in India. To discuss this, we have the expert, the author himself, Mr. Vivek Sood, senior advocate. He's an expert in commercial, criminal, and arbitration laws. Joining him would be two other panelists. We have Mr. Tejas Karia. He's the partner, head of arbitration at Shardul Amarchand and Mangaldas. Joining him would be Mr. Mayank Mishra, partner at Indus Law, also an expert in dispute resolution. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining this discussion. To start with, I would request Mr. Vivek Sood to share a few words about the book with us.
First of all, it's a pleasure to be here on this platform with my good friends, Mr. Tejas Karia and Mr. Mayank Mishra. And, about my book, I will quickly run through my views. While reading hundreds of judgments on corporate laws, especially insolvency and arbitration, I found the emergence of commercial justice in India. Like we have the civil justice and the criminal justice, I can see the emergence of commercial justice in India. And I was inspired by, a book written by Mrs. Zia Modi many years back, 10 judgments that changed the face of the nation. So therefore, I followed the case law approach while writing this book. What I did was that while reading all these judgments, I selected, important issues. And then I picked up game-changing judgments of the Supreme Court on those issues. And then I have, analyzed those judgments in a very simple format. Now, I have picked up some important issues, under the arbitration law in the arbitration landscape in India. For example, the parity, between government bodies and private enterprises in the arbitration landscape. Now, the Supreme Court has gone on to say that there is parity between the two. Then I have also picked up, the topic of impartiality and independence of arbitrators in India. Proceeding further, I have, gone on to analyze the important judgment of the Supreme Court on automatic stay. That was a very vexed issue in the legal system, and that has been settled by the Supreme Court. Further, I have, looked at the one bite at the cherry principle that is applicable when it comes to challenging foreign awards. So these are some of the issues which I have dealt with in my book.
Thank you, Vivek, sir. Thank you for covering the arbitration law aspect of the book and how it is helpful for all the readers to understand the arbitration law better. So moving on further, we would like to start with how arbitration is a viable mechanism, for alternative dispute resolution. I would request Mayank if you could share your thoughts on that.
First of all, thank you, Sania and Lawwiser, for having me on this platform today. And now, compared to litigating commercial disputes in courts, arbitration offers certain key distinctive advantages. And I would say first among them are certain facets of party autonomy, which is at the core of arbitration, as we all know. Now, parties going for arbitration have a freedom to choose the people who decide their disputes. Now, parties may choose men of commerce to rule on their commercial disputes rather than men of law, or a mix, or an institutional body. Second among those freedoms is the freedom to choose a set of procedural rules which would guide the arbitral process. In case of international commercial disputes, in fact, substantive law governing the dispute can also be chosen by the parties. Third among them, and more recently emphasized by the Supreme Court in the PASL judgment is the freedom to choose a preferred legal place of arbitration, i.e. the seat of arbitration. Now, in fact, after the judgment, recent judgment of PASL, two Indian parties are free to choose a foreign legal seat, meaning thereby they can choose a foreign legal place for post-award legal remedies. Now, this kind of party autonomy is the first thing which is distinctly better or offers an advantage over litigating in courts. Apart from these, and to borrow expression which of Mr. Sood used in his book, some game-changing amendments in the law, which made more viable arbitration as a more viable dispute resolution mechanism. Now, first among them was Section 29A, which was inserted within the 2015 amendment. Now, this introduces a time-bound outcome or provides for a time limit for rendering awards. Parties can be more certain about by when they can see the outcome of the dispute. Second among them, for me, would be Section 31A of the Act, which mandates and provides for a realistic and compensatory cost regime. Now, this acts as a pre-filter, discouraging frivolous claims and encouraging genuine ones. Third, for me, would be a more recent amendment of 2019, by which Section 42A was added, which serves well to insulate commercial disputes and parties involved from public air by providing confidentiality of arbitral proceedings.
Thank you, Mayank, for actually highlighting, why arbitration turns out to be a viable mechanism. I would request Tejas sir and Vivek sir, if you can also share your thoughts, something apart from the amendments and, the points shared by Mayank.
What Mayank said is that arbitration is the most viable means for resolving a dispute. And in experience, what we see is that it's a most preferred means, because if we compare with mediation or conciliation or good faith negotiation, arbitration is a very good mix of the procedure and the adjudicatory process, whereby we can have a definite result at the end of the process. And one thing which we have seen in last 1.5 years is use of technology. So arbitration has moved toward the virtual space, and we are saving huge cost and time by doing the arbitration virtually. So the use of technology has really helped in reducing the time and cost in arbitration. So I feel that has helped to make arbitration more viable than any other dispute resolution mechanism.
There are three aspects that actually make arbitration more viable and very viable and robust. Firstly, by the Supreme Court's interpretation of the law, parity has been brought about between government bodies and private enterprises. Now, in the famous Palm Developments case, the state of West Bengal took up this point that we have some special exemption under Order 27, Rule 8A of CPC, and we should not be made to make any pre-deposit in the court because Section 34 challenges pending, etc. And now the Supreme Court went on to hold that the archaic laws of CPC, that were made in the colonial era, will not apply to the arbitration landscape. So, the Supreme Court has delinked arbitration law from archaic laws. I mean, that makes arbitration very robust and viable, firstly. Secondly, I find that, vexed issues in arbitration law, and Tejas and Mayank will agree with me on this, that Supreme Court has been very expeditiously, deciding these issues. What took 20 years and 15 years and 25 years, matters would get admitted and they would go on in the regular list. The Supreme Court over the last 5-7 years, one is seeing the Supreme Court expedites its decisions on vexed issues. Now that brings in certainty in the arbitration law. Thirdly, in my view, what makes arbitration very viable is the emergence of institutions. I am an arbitrator in some of the ICA arbitrations Now, ICA as a body or Delhi Arbitration Center, which is sponsored by the High Court. Now, the emergence of these institutions in the arbitration sector makes arbitration a very viable proposition.
Thank you everyone for highlighting why arbitration is a preferred form of alternative dispute resolution. Taking a step ahead and moving further to the arbitrator aspects of the law, we all know independence and impartiality is very important and crucial here. So if you can highlight and let our audience know how the Supreme Court, through its judgment, has established the principle of independence and impartiality in arbitration. Tejas, sir, if you can share your thoughts first with that.
Thanks, Sanya. So, independence and impartiality, of course, is the hallmark of the arbitration process, as Mr. Sood has stated in his chapter 11 of his book. And what I have seen is that in practice, the independence and impartiality matters a lot. And when I was part of the Law Commission committee, we discussed that at length as to how to bring the soft law, the IBA guidelines on independence and impartiality as part of our own legislation. And India is the only country where we have the soft law in a codified way, where we have Schedule 5 and Schedule 7 of our own Arbitration Act, which provide the category of the arbitrators, which will either raise a doubt of the independence of impartiality or make them ineligible to be appointed as an arbitrator. We also amended our Section 12, and Supreme Court has, over a period of time in last 6 years, has interpreted all these provisions in a very positive way. The Supreme Court has held that if you are ineligible to be an arbitrator, then you are a de jure unable to perform your duty. And you don't have to go to arbitrator and challenge the arbitrator. The arbitrator is removed automatically. And that is the case of HRD versus Gale, where this issue came up before the Supreme Court, and Supreme Court interpreted Schedule 5, Schedule 7, and Section 12 in a very beautiful way, and relied upon Section 14, eligibility of the arbitrator to act in the matter. So therefore, you don't have to remove the arbitrator, and the arbitrator itself becomes ineligible. Now, moving on, the Supreme Court also, in the subsequent judgment of TRF, has laid down that if the parties have agreed to appoint an arbitrator who is otherwise ineligible, that arbitrator cannot be appointed, and all the more the arbitrator cannot be appointed by the same person also who is ineligible. So if there is no foundation, the superstructure also cannot stand on that foundation. So that is the logic, and that has given a lot of significance to the independence and impartiality. And this is a continuous duty towards the parties, because the arbitrator's role is very important. It's not that at the stage of appointment of an arbitrator, the arbitrator has to disclose. Arbitrator has to continuously be independent and impartial, because in this social world, there is a lot of instances where we get influence, and the best part about the arbitration is that you have to remain independent and impartial throughout the process of arbitration. This judgment of TRF was followed in subsequently in Perkins and Bharat Broadband, where also the employees of any party were held to be ineligible to be appointed. But in some cases where the employees have retired say more than 10 years back, and there is no justifiable doubt as to the independence and impartiality, Supreme Court also upheld such appointments and said that just because an arbitrator is an ex-employee of one of the parties, that does not make that person ineligible. The whole idea is of cooling off, and even after the appointment of an arbitrator, and once a dispute has arisen, parties can waive in writing the ineligibility and can go ahead and appoint this arbitrator who is covered by Schedule 7. So looking at this judgment, we can very well see that the main thrust of all this judgment is to ensure independence and impartiality of arbitration, because justice is not only to be done, but seem to have been done. Ultimately, what we need is the independence and impartiality of arbitrators, which is fundamental to the arbitration process. and to have an enforceable award at the end of the arbitration.
Thank you, Tejas, for actually highlighting key judgments that have played that crucial role in bringing out the principles. Mayank and Vivek, sir, if you have any thoughts on this.
Very briefly, as in what Tejas outlined very well, was that we are the first country and perhaps the only one who have codified these rules regarding independence and impartiality in the Act itself. Now, these go a long way in kind of restoring or creating a faith system where litigants and business people actually believe in a independent adjudication of their disputes. People tend to have a lot of faith in court, but we all know courts are all overburdened. Nobody has time to decide your commercial dispute, etc. So it goes a very, very long way in doing that. And I think we are the only country who have done it. So I think that's one of the most welcome changes, which is going to be instrumental in pushing arbitration in the country.
Tejas has, very well encapsulated, on independence and impartiality of arbitrators, very briefly and in a very crisp manner. I'll just add one point. I was reading TRF. In fact, I've written about it also. In TRF, the managing director had nominated a Supreme Court judge as a nominee to be the arbitrator. So even that was nullified. So therefore, the emphasis on, impartiality and independence of arbitrator, and as Tejas said, if the infrastructure collapses, the superstructure also collapses. So the Supreme Court has gone a long way in emphasizing on impartiality and independence of arbitrators.
So moving on further from, independence and impartiality of arbitrators to the arbitral award. Vivek, sir, if you can share with us, there's this issue of stay of implementation of awards. So how have the courts dealt with it, which comes due to the challenge of arbitral awards? If you can share your thoughts on that.
Insofar as stay of awards is concerned, the earlier view, the pre-2015 amendment era, we had the concept of automatic stay, which meant that the moment you challenge the award in Section 34 before the court concerned, there was an automatic stay, and there was no discretion vested in the court, to make the losing party deposit any amount or give any security. So what happened was Section 34 petitions were kept pending for years together because of the clogged, board in the courts. And as a result whereof, the very purpose of expeditious disposal of dispute resolution through arbitration, that purpose was defeated. Now, this issue came up before the Supreme Court in judgments of FISA developers and NALCO, where the Supreme Court said that Section 34 uses mandatory language. So where there's no discretion with the court in making the losing party deposit any amount in the court during the pendency of the 34 challenge. But the Supreme Court in NALCO in 2004 noticed that, this situation wasn't a happy situation, and it was defeating the very object of arbitration. And therefore, the Supreme Court recognized that some recommendations had been made by the ministry to the parliament to amend the law. So the Supreme Court, asked the parliament and the ministry to expedite that process. So now come the amendments of 2015, where Section 36 has been amended, and discretion has been vested, in the court. When an award is challenged, discretion is vested in the court to direct the losing party to give some security or to deposit the entire amount of the award or a part amount of the award. Now, Section 26 was also incorporated, in the Arbitration Amendment Act of 2015. And, to take care of what happens to the challenges that are pending in the courts. So Section 26 was legislated to give clarity However, Section 26 itself became a very contentious issue. And there were conflicting judgments of the high courts across the country. And eventually the matter went back to the Supreme Court in BCCI versus Kochi Cricket. And the Supreme Court said that arbitral proceedings and legal proceedings commenced before 23rd October 2015. That is the commencement date of the amended Arbitration Act of 2015. The amended avatar of Section 36 will apply to arbitral proceedings and court proceedings commenced after 23rd October 2015. Now, a question arose as to what happens to the pending Section 34 applications that were filed prior to 23rd October 2015. Now, in the light of the purpose of Arbitration Act and in the light of the UN model rules on which our Arbitration Act is based, the Supreme Court went on to hold that even though proceedings were pending before the court under 34 prior to 23rd October 2015, the amended avatar will apply. Now, during the course of BCCI versus Kochi, it was noticed by the Supreme Court that the government was planning to bring in Section 87 into the Arbitration Act, so that, the amended act will not apply to pending proceedings. Now, the Supreme Court cautioned the government not to bring in such an amendment, not to bring in Section 87, because that would be very regressive and it would be against the very scheme of the arbitration, the purpose of the arbitration law. However, the government brought in Section 87, and now we have a very important judgment in the case of Hindustan Construction Company 2019, where the Supreme Court has struck down Section 87 as unconstitutional. It has been found to be manifestly arbitrary, regressive, and the Supreme Court has said that we had cautioned the government against 87, but the government has brought in 87, and that's regressive. One more important point, which has been made by the Supreme Court in Hindustan Construction Company is that even prior to the amendments of 2015, the automatic stay concept that had been laid down by NALCO, etc., was erroneous. That was incorrect. So we never had the automatic stay concept, and it had been erroneously held to be so in these judgments. So that's, so therefore the Supreme Court has brought about a lot of clarity, as to Section 34 and Section 37 and regarding the automatic stay.
So this automatic stay has always been a problem. And of course, Supreme Court has now clarified that there was nothing called automatic stay prior to 2015 as well. But what happened in till such time we got that clarity is that moment a party used to challenge an award, your enforcement would not happen. So that was the problem, and the challenge used to take years and you can't get the fruits of your award. Now with this amendment, the entire approach toward challenging an award has changed. The parties think twice before even thinking of challenging an award, because they have fear that they will have to shell out the money which has been awarded against them. And moment they have to deposit the money, the whole approach changes, and they don't want to challenge sometimes, or they want to settle. So we have seen in last 5 years, most of the time once the award come, parties try and negotiate and try to settle the matter after the award. And that has brought in a welcome change, because at least the parties who are successful are getting the fruits of the award rather than waiting for a long drawn enforcement process. So this amendment has created wonders for the law of arbitration in India, and it has changed the attitude towards the parties post award. When they lose the arbitration, they don't always want to challenge it because they have to deposit the money. And there is also a question whether the court can grant unconditional stay or not. And I argued a case before the Supreme Court where the court felt that yes, unless there is a fraud, and that is a 2019 amendment, that unless there is a fraud, the court should ask for a deposit of any money when there is a money award. And that is the discretion of the court whether to grant unconditional stay or not. And Supreme Court set aside the orders of various high court which had granted the unconditional stay. And the whole concept is to ensure that the party is put to terms if they want to get a stay of the enforcement, because the award is as good as the decree and challenge is only on a limited ground. So therefore, it is very important that the party who loses at least deposits the money or secures the awarded amount in order to challenge the award or get a stay of the enforcement.
What's been very, very elaborately put up by Mr. Sood and summed up by Tejas, I'll just add one point. We have moved away in last 7 years, post the 2015 amendment, from a scenario where award was really the beginning of the litigation to where award is now the end of the litigation. So 2015 amendment in section 36 and 34 were a kind of a paradigm change, which changed the fortunes of arbitration in the country, which should have been there, as has now been clarified by the Supreme Court, as we have seen more arbitration fundamentalist judgments coming to push arbitrations. Earlier, all a losing party needed to do was to go and make a filing in the court, and which basically meant an effective stay. You didn't have to argue a word of it. If it was filed, it was good enough. From that position, post this amendment, despite the confusion regarding section 26 and then 87, today we stand at a place where when an award comes, a monetary award comes, the winner does feel that, you know, he's got something tangible which is now enforceable in a short period of time, or at least there is enough proceeding or foothold to secure the monetary award. So I think it's been a very, very welcome change and something which really makes sense for commercial disputes.
Thank you for actually sharing these, because it really helps our audience understand the issue of the stay on implementation and how it has evolved. Moving a step further and towards the last question, we all know there have been various amendments in the arbitration law, and that's how it has been evolved into the preferred form of mechanism. So what are the changes do you all think are required in arbitration law? And what is the way ahead in this whole arbitration law?
So we have come a long way since the 2015 amendments. We had the second round of amendment in 2019, which has brought in the emphasis on the institutionalization of arbitration. Because what we see is that most of our arbitrations are ad hoc arbitrations, and we need to promote institutional arbitration. And the shift has started. We have a very long way to go because we don't have number of institutions to run the arbitration. And we are now having institutions in India who are equally good as the other foreign institutions. And we have also seen that ICC and SIAC are also very active in India. So if the seat of arbitration is in India, we should always prefer to the institution arbitration because it has its own advantages. And the parties are now realizing, starting from appointment of an arbitrators, having the rules so that the entire process is known. You know the cost of the arbitration from the very beginning. There is a scrutiny of the award. So all these are advantages of institutional arbitration, which we all recognize, and we should slowly move towards entirely institutional arbitration so that we get the sanctity to the whole process. The second thing which I would like to emphasize is also connected to the institutional arbitration is recognition of emergency arbitrator. Now, what happens is that every time there is a dispute and you want an interim relief, we have to go to court and get an interim relief before invocation of the arbitration, because the setting up of the tribunal, constitution of the tribunal takes time, and interim relief is paramount, because if you don't get the interim relief in time, the whole subject matter of the arbitration can get destroyed. So emergency arbitrator is an answer to an alternative of the court and to grant an interim relief. And that can only be possible if you have an institutional arbitration. Now, emergency arbitrator was recommended by the Law Commission and also High Powered Committee in 2019. but somehow that definition of arbitrator has not been amended to include the emergency arbitrator. And because of that, now we are relying on the judgments of Delhi High Court and some of the pending cases where we will see that there is a judicial recognition of emergency arbitrator and saying that the emergency arbitrators awards are orders passed under Section 17, which gives power to the tribunal to grant interim relief. So once we have those recognition, it will give a lot of impetus to the appointment of the emergency arbitrators, because most of the institutions have the provision for appointment of an emergency arbitrator. But the question comes is that whether those orders passed by the emergency arbitrators are enforceable or not. And with the kind of interpretation the courts are taking, I'm very confident that in future we will have this change in the law either by way of an amendment of the act or by way of a judicial pronouncement where we will have a recognition of the emergency arbitrator.
As to what changes we would expect or we would want in the Arbitration Act, one of the paramount things I believe would be shared also by Tejas here is that some form of model rules ought to be prescribed in some form and put in a schedule to the Arbitration Act. And this is essentially to remove the ad hocism related with ad hoc arbitrations. Because if there are to be ad hoc arbitrations, what eventually happens in practice is that ad hoc arbitrators fall back on some form of truncated civil procedure code to run the arbitration, with the lack of procedural rules or so to say reference point as a procedural rule. Now in ad hoc, if the Act prescribes a model rules for ad hoc arbitrations, like the Companies Act used to, as in 56 Act had a table A of articles, now table F of articles for companies, we can have something like model rules where if there are ad hoc arbitrations, there are some rule, as in some form of basic procedural outline to expedite the processes, simplified methods for taking evidence, etc. Also, to provide for basic things like what we see as internationally accepted good practices in arbitration. For example, prescribing a terms of reference before you get into adjudicatory process in arbitration. So that will take care of a lot of issues which arise during challenge procedures. So if model rules could be framed or developed and incorporated in some form as a guide to the Act, it will go a long way in supporting and gradually making a move from ad hoc arbitrations to institutional arbitrations. And one more suggestion, I do not know whether it can be a change in law, but certainly can be a change in terms of the attitude, because most of the arbitrations, quite a lot of arbitrations in this country has public authorities and government authorities on one side. It is extremely important if there could be a kind of a mandate which requires these authorities to at least follow some sort of institutional rules or choose institutional arbitration instead of their own ad hoc arbitrations where their chairman has to decide as to who would be the arbitrator and things like that.
And just to add to what Mayank said is, with regard to the model rules, Indian Arbitration Forum has made an attempt to have a model rules for ad hoc arbitration. And that is a very important piece of a soft law, which India has developed, because Indian Arbitration Forum is, the whole idea is to create an arbitration bar of the lawyers who are practicing arbitration. And so that is the association of independent lawyers who can come together and work towards promoting arbitration in India. And these rules which we have prepared are very helpful for ad hoc arbitration. So anybody who wants to use, they can just adopt it and use it in the arbitration as if it's an institutional arbitration. So it gives a flavor of a institutional arbitration to an ad hoc arbitration. And that is where more and more use of these rules will give them a sanctity as a soft law. Like we are using IBA rules on taking evidence, or IBA
Absolutely.
rules are relied upon for independence and impartiality. So these are the rules which will really help in the ad hoc arbitrations as well.
I would like to highlight two important areas where we need reform. and this is the way forward. First of all, I feel we need specialized and dedicated courts, that here arbitration matters. At this point of time, arbitration is a part of the commercial courts, but then we need to delink, the arbitration matters from the commercial courts. Firstly, it will expedite disposal, and it will bring in, the flavor and expertise required to decide arbitration matters. Of course, having an arbitration appellate tribunal is maybe it's too far away at this point of time to delink it from the High Court and the traditional courts, but that may be much into the future. But we need dedicated courts within the legal system. That's one area. Secondly, I feel we need training institutes, set up by the government, because in many cases the arbitrators are, technocrats, engineers, etc. Now, while they are very good in their areas, engineering, etc., etc., but when it comes to legal principles, I feel they need to be trained. So some training institute, some informal mechanism should be developed. Some of these chief engineers, etc., who write the awards, they are very good on the technical side. But when it comes to the contract law, damages, or the precedents, etc., I find some of these awards to be wanting. So maybe training may go a long way in enhancing the arbitration landscape in India.
Thank you, Vivek, sir, Tejas, and Mayank, for sharing these insights with us. They were really helpful in understanding what are the crucial changes that are required and where those changes are really needed in the law. Thank you for actually throwing light on that. And thank you for taking time out for us and being part of this really interesting discussion on arbitration laws. It really helps our audience understand better. And congratulations on your book, Vivek, sir. This one is actually a very interesting read and something that all the readers should pick up and read and understand the insolvency and arbitration law better. Thank you.